Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. What is the legal road ahead in the Kiely Rodni case? Thus far, we've covered 3 intertextualities and we've got 2 more to go, including this one. The first 3 included, number 1, the ordinary biomechanics when someone accidentally drives into water. The New Zealand case, which was actually photographed, demonstrates that you don't even need to include post-mortem gases and flotation to place a victim in the rear, because they place them there themselves following the air pocket. Number 2, the Honda's telematics could provide the most accurate information regarding when the incident occurred and also time of death. The telematics, if they're as sophisticated as the Nicole Linton crash in Windsor Hills, as sophisticated as the one used in that vehicle, it could also show how Kiely was driving, what speed she was driving, if she had her hands on the steering wheel, and if she swerved or braked at the last moment. Interestingly, while I think the telematics may potentially be the most important information in this case, it may provide us with the most accurate data. It seems like no one was actually interested in watching that particular video. So the information that is possibly crucial, the intertextuality covering that, no one seems to have really paid attention to that. I just find that interesting, maybe a little curious. Then number 3, the last intertextuality we dealt with, we saw how toxicology works in the Anne Hesh incident. That when someone is alive, the turnaround can be instant or just a matter of hours. We also saw something that was quite surprising. Although intoxicated, Hesh had no alcohol in her system whatsoever. So the results of toxicology can sometimes be unambiguous as well as surprising. In Kiely's case, neither the autopsy nor the toxicology are likely to shed any light on time of death. And that's brought us up to speed with where we are now. Now we're going to deal with legal intertextualities. That's the subject matter for the 4th intertextuality. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So there is going to be one more intertextuality after this. There will be a total of 5. This is the 4th one we're dealing with. I think 2 prior intertextualities that we touched on are also worth looking at for contrast and perspective. I mean, in terms of legal intertextuality. So, for example, we can see there are legal consequences in the Anne Hesh case, despite it being an unintentional accident. Can you see that? As well as in the Nicole Linton crash in Windsor Hills, there are also legal consequences there. And the question remains, was that an accident while it's still being investigated? The point of those comparisons is to show just how quickly the legal machinery can move when there's a vehicle accident, causing serious damage and serious loss of life. So why is it law enforcement appears to be moving, well, slower than one might expect? Well, let's look at the intertextuality of rust and see if we can get some answers to this slowness question. Now, if you think the Kiely Rodni investigation is taking long or taking too long, the Rust incident will have its 1-year anniversary as an ongoing investigation in about the 1-year anniversary to that incident. I think there's a simple reason why Rust is taking so long. It involves numerous people, not the typical handful of people that are typically involved in a true crime investigation. What we've got here is a cast, a crew of around 100 people, even more than that. There's also potentially numerous lawsuits. They've already been announced, and a very high profile and very rich person at the center of the investigation who has been very vocal on his own platforms and on mainstream media about his innocence. In other words, the investigation has got to be thorough and careful. Anything they say, they've got to be able to prove. If they can't, they could be sued, and that takes time. As recently as a few days ago, Fox News reported, quote, "As the Rust shooting investigation continues, a Los Angeles judge on Friday dismissed claims of assault and intentional infliction of emotional distress against the producers of the principal production company. This is a quote from the ruling of that judge. He said, while plaintiff alleges that demurring defendants assisted Baldwin by supplying the loaded weapon, plaintiff's allegations fail to establish that demurring defendants knew Baldwin would aim and fire the loaded weapon towards the plaintiff, such that they would be jointly liable for his intentional conduct, the judge wrote. That's according to the media outlet. Now, if you think about this whole idea of the idea that they didn't know that Baldwin would aim and fire the loaded weapon towards the plaintiff. If you take the Kiely Rodni case and you really, and it is a little bit unfair, it's not quite the same. It's a little bit like apples and oranges. You can't really sticky tape this exact same scenario in Rust onto that. But if we do kind of push the intertextuality aspect, then you could say, well, how on earth could the partygoers know that Kiely would get into a vehicle, drive the wrong way, and whatever happened to her would happen, right? It's the same kind of thing. In other words, how are they responsible for what happened to her, right? The article goes on to say, in fact, plaintiff's allegations would show the opposite to be true. The only person who knew Baldwin was going to fire the weapon was Baldwin. Now, if you use that same argument, and I'm not saying you should, just that if you did, you could say the only person who knew Kiely was going to get into a vehicle and drive the way that she was driving was Kiely, right? Now, if you think about the allegation here, it's the co-producers of Rust are responsible for what Baldwin did. It's kind of a similar thinking that all 300 partygoers are covering up or responsible for what happened to Kiely. Are they responsible, or is Kiely responsible, or is no one responsible? There is the reality of what happens in true crime, and then there's the attempt to make things look worse than they are, or to minimize it. Reality tends to be somewhere in the middle. It's seldom as bad or as innocent as it's made out to be. It's law enforcement's job to probe that unknown territory, and that takes time. If Alec Baldwin is a powerful and influential presence within the Rust investigation, AWP is the same within the Kiely Rodni case. Baldwin seems to discredit law enforcement by saying they took a long time to arrive on the scene. I think that actually may be a reference to the EMS. And he may have said, I'm not 100% sure about this, I think he said when they arrived they didn't seem to appreciate how serious the situation was. Well, I think part of that was the person making the 911 call not saying what the situation was. They weren't completely explicit saying what was going on. And you kind of got the idea that someone had decided that they don't want to be totally transparent about what had happened. And so EMS assumed that it was just another casualty, another on-set casualty. So whose fault is it for creating that impression? AWP have also criticized law enforcement with some justification. It's because of this that I think Ali don't want to make any further mistakes. They want to be thorough. And I think you have the same thing going on in the Rust investigation. Law enforcement want to be thorough. They don't want to make any mistakes. They want to come up with proper protocols. They want to follow proper protocols. They want to be have correct answers, and they want to be procedurally correct. They want to basically have a watertight case. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if they are doing accident reconstruction with animation. That's in terms of the investigation into Kiely Rodni. I wouldn't be surprised if they're going to the trouble to actually do an animation of what likely happened, showing Kiely driving into the reservoir, and then what happens after that, and how it all scientifically makes sense, right? Now, if you think about it, Helena's husband used that as exact same thing. Helena's husband's lawyers also came up with an animation which had all the exact parameters of the church, where various people were standing, and exactly what happened. And it's quite strange when you actually see the animation, it kind of does shift reality, because as simple and obvious as it is to imagine, it's a little bit different actually seeing everything animated independently. But doing that takes a lot of time, and it is quite expensive to put together as well. I must say, if they're not doing that, if they're not putting together an animation, I think that would be quite disappointing. If all of this is about waiting for the toxicology, that would be a little bit disappointing. I've also seen commentary that suggests when an accident takes place, you simply don't have an investigation. And so that's why this isn't an accident. It's just not true. I think the Rust incident was an accident, right? I think it was accidental. I don't think Baldwin intended to shoot Helena with a live round, or his director for that matter, let alone kill his cinematographer. But law enforcement nevertheless has to make sure. So even when you do have an accident, law enforcement must check. And the same applies if there's a car accident. Law enforcement must make sure that what happened, what seemed to have happened, happened. And even if something isn't intentional and is accidental, it doesn't mean there aren't consequences. You can have an accident associated with recklessness or negligence. That's been the focus of the probe in the Rust incident. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're trying to find out the same. Was there recklessness? Was there negligence in what happened to Kiely? These same questions have been asked about the nurse who crashed her Mercedes through an intersection in the Windsor Hills incident. And it's part of the legal legacy after the Anne Hesh incident as well. So to say accidents aren't investigated isn't just naive, it's incorrect. One of the big reasons why investigations can take a really long time is because law enforcement simply don't have all the answers. They don't know. In the Suzanne Morphew case, they had a lot of information. They decided to act on it, and ultimately it seems they may have acted prematurely. Even though it seemed like, for us, they took forever to do anything. In that case, they didn't know where Suzanne's body is, and they still don't. And so not knowing certain things can also prolong an investigation. Not knowing critical things. So it's possible that law enforcement don't have the vehicle telematics, and if that's the case, they wouldn't really be able to say with any certainty when Kiely died. That would leave a big hole at the center of this case. In other cases like Caitlin Armstrong, but also JonBenet Ramsey and Madeleine McCann, big legal players can delay or postpone or draw out investigations not just for weeks or months, but for decades. I don't see that happening here. I don't see there being any big legal players in this case. I think if there is any legal aftermath to the Rodni case, it may be from the victimization many of the teenagers may have experienced from social media, accusing them directly or indirectly of being suspects. This isn't speculation. This has already been made part of the mainstream media narrative. So what I'm telling you isn't what I think. It's already part of the fabric of the mainstream media narrative regarding this case. Even after it was announced that Sammy Smith had lawyered up, it didn't seem to deter social media from going after her with their pitchforks. So there may be some legal consequences for that. But beyond that, I don't see any trial in the Rodni case, which makes it distinct, I think, from the Anne Hesh and the Rust incident, which were accidents that did and do deserve a trial. And I think we'll see trials in those cases, respectively. Does that make sense? Now, I'm not going to take it further than that. The very final intertextuality we're going to deal with is, I think, the most fascinating. It is when you are given an incomplete mosaic, where does your thinking go? Does it go to foul play or does it go to accident? And you may answer that question one way or another, but I'm going to take you into two very unusual cases where exactly that is the scenario, and see how thinking goes in a particular direction, and then we see what happens ultimately in the end. It's really, really interesting. It's, once again, fascinating, the insights that we draw out of intertextuality. So look out for that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.